I remember my first day at Harmon and Greaves like it was yesterday. I was a bundle of nerves, clutching my cheap, coffee-stained resume like it was a lifeline. The office was a maze of cubicles, buzzing with the sound of typing and phone calls. I was there, in my ill-fitting suit, trying to blend into the walls. "Hey, you must be the new girl. I'm Richard," a voice called out, snapping me out of my daze. I turned to see a man, probably in his late 30s, leaning against the doorframe of what I assumed was his office. He had that kind of casual confidence that made you instantly pay attention. Yeah, hi. I'm Anna," I stammered, extending a shaky hand. Richard's handshake was firm, his smile easy. "Don't look so scared. We don't bite here." "Well, most of us don't," he chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I let out a nervous laugh, my tension easing a fraction. "Good to know. Come on, I'll show you around. You'll be working under me. And don't worry, I'm a pretty cool boss," he said, leading the way. As we walked, Richard pointed out the different departments, introducing me to a blur of faces. It was overwhelming, but Richard's presence was strangely comforting. He had this way of talking, straightforward and full of jokes, that made you feel like you were in on something, like you belonged. When we reached a small, empty desk, Richard stopped. "This is you. Not a corner office, but it's got the best view of the coffee machine." I smiled, my first genuine smile of the day. "I'll take it. I love coffee." "See, I knew we'd get along. You need anything, you let me know, okay?" "Sure, thanks, Richard." The day flew by in a haze of new information and names I had no hope of remembering. But through it all, Richard was there, a steady presence in the chaos. He answered my questions, no matter how stupid, and never made me feel like the office newbie. As the day wound down, I found myself at the coffee machine, pouring a much-needed cup. "Survived your first day, I see," Richard said, walking up with his own mug. "Just barely," I said, a smile tugging at my lips. "Ah, you did great. Most people don't find the coffee machine on their first day. You're already ahead of the curve." I laughed, the sound echoing slightly in the now quiet office. "Thanks to you." Richard leaned against the counter, his eyes meeting mine. "Hey, it's a team effort here. You need help, you ask. That's how we do things." I nodded, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. "I will." "Thanks, Richard." "No problem. See you tomorrow, Anna. And hey, don't worry. You're gonna fit right in." As I left the office, Richard's words echoed in my head. Maybe this job, this new start, wasn't going to be as tough as I thought. And it all started with an unexpected friendship with a man named Richard, who had a smile that could ease the heaviest of doubts. From friendship to love, Richard and I had a whirlwind romance that led us down the aisle. But even our vows were overshadowed by Mrs. Greaves' insistence on a prenuptial agreement. It was like she was betting against us from the start, making sure her precious son wouldn't lose a dime if things went south. We signed, sealing our marriage with a document that said, in no uncertain terms, "What's yours is yours, and what's mine is mine." Moving into Richard's place should have been the beginning of our happily ever after. But it felt more like stepping into a minefield, especially with Mrs. Greaves lurking around every corner. Richard's dad, Mr. Greaves, was the only silver lining. He welcomed me with open arms, treating me like the daughter he never had. But Mrs. Greaves? She was a storm cloud in our sunny sky. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen trying to follow a recipe Richard loved. The smell of spices was just starting to fill the air when Mrs. Greaves marched in, her nose turned up like she smelled something foul. "You're ruining that dish, you know. Richard likes his food a certain way," she accused, her voice sharp and unforgiving. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my cool. "I'm following the recipe Richard gave me, Mrs. Greaves. He said it's his favorite." She scoffed, leaning against the counter, her eyes piercing. "A recipe? My Richard doesn't need his food out of a book. What kind of wife are you, can't even cook without instructions?" I bit back the sting of her words, focusing on the pan in front of me. I'm trying, Mrs. Greaves. I just want to make him happy. She snorted, her disdain as clear as day. Happy? With this mess? You've got a lot to learn, girl. My son deserves better. The door swung open, and Mr. Greaves walked in, his presence like a calm in the storm. Now, no need for all this fuss. It smells wonderful in here, Anna. Don't mind her, she's just set in her old ways. Mrs. Greaves huffed, her eyes narrowing at her husband. Set in my ways? At least I know how to run a household. Not like some, she said, shooting me a venomous look before storming out. The situation only got worse when we found out I couldn't have children. Mrs. Greaves' disappointment turned into outright hostility. One day, she cornered me in the living room, her words like daggers. I knew it. I knew you were trouble from the start. Can't even give my son an heir. What use are you? She spat, her eyes cold and unforgiving. I felt a lump in my throat, the pain of her words cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. I wanted children just as much as Richard did, Mrs. Greaves. It's not something I can control. She laughed, a sound void of any warmth. Control? The only thing you're trying to control is my son, tying him down with your barrenness. You think you're clever, but I see right through you. You'll never be part of this family. Not really. For 15 long years, Mrs. Greaves' nagging was like a constant, droning background noise in our life. It was always there, always chipping away at what we had. During that time, the warmth between Richard and me faded, like the color on an old photograph. We even started sleeping in separate bedrooms, drifting apart in a house that felt more like a shared space than a shared life. Richard's words became sharper, more cutting. He'd look at me sometimes, and it was like he was tallying up my flaws, counting every wrinkle and every gray hair like they were marks against me. Getting old, aren't we, Anna? He'd say, his voice cold, his eyes scanning my face like he was looking for more signs of age. Seems like every time I look at you, there's another line there that wasn't there before. The day Mr. Greaves passed away was the day everything changed. It hit us all like a ton of bricks, but none more so than Richard. I thought this tragedy would bring us closer, but instead, it was the beginning of the end. I was sitting in the living room, a sea of condolence cards spread out in front of me when Richard walked in. His face was like stone, his eyes hollow. We need to talk, Anna, he said, his voice flat. I looked up, feeling a knot in my stomach. What's wrong, Richard? He threw a stack of papers on the table. The words divorce agreement glared up at me in bold letters. I'm done, Anna. This, us, it's over. I felt like I'd been punched. Over? Just like that? After 15 years? Richard shrugged, avoiding my eyes. It's for the best. We've been drifting apart for years, you know it's true. I shook my head, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. And you decide this now? Right after your dad dies? What kind of man are you? He flinched, but his resolve didn't waver. The kind of man who knows when to move on. And I'm moving on, Anna. With her. Her. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. That's when she walked in, this young thing, barely in her mid-20s, all smug smiles and high heels. She looked around the room, her nose wrinkled in distaste. Ugh, this place needs a serious makeover. It's so old and drab, just like its owner. I stood up, my hands shaking with rage. How dare you come into my house and speak to me like that? She laughed, a sound that made my blood boil. Your house? Please. It's Richard's house. And soon, it'll be my house. And trust me, I'm going to make some changes. Richard just stood there, a smirk on his face. You heard her, Anna. Pack your things. You've got no claim here, remember? That prenup you were so eager to sign made sure of that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was a nightmare, it had to be. You're throwing me out for her? After everything? He shrugged again, like we were talking about the weather, not our lives. That's the way it is, Anna. She's young, she's vibrant, and she can give me what you never could. A family. Those words, they cut deeper than any knife. I'd wanted children just as much as he had, but fate had other plans. And now, he was using that against me, throwing me away like yesterday's trash. He didn't even look at me as I walked out the door. And her laughter, that cruel, mocking laughter, followed me as I stepped into the cold, uncaring night. Settling into my new apartment felt like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. The space was cramped, the walls bare, and the silence, deafening. Gone were the days of a sprawling house and a life I thought I had secured. It was just me and my thoughts that often strayed to the life I left behind. I tried to drown them out by burying myself in work, taking on extra projects, staying late, anything to keep my mind off the disaster my life had become. One particularly tough day, I was at the office later than usual, the only light on in a sea of dark cubicles. That's when I heard the door swing open, a sound that echoed in the empty space. Working late, or avoiding reality? A familiar voice sneered. It was Richard, his silhouette looming in the doorway. I straightened up, my hands clenched tight around my pen. What are you doing here, Richard? He walked in, his steps slow, deliberate. Came to see how the other half lives. Looks pretty grim from where I'm standing. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself to meet his gaze. I'm doing just fine, thanks for your concern. He laughed, the sound harsh and unforgiving. Fine? Anna, you're a mess. Look at you, all alone in this dump of an office, while I'm out there living the life. His words stung, each one a reminder of what I'd lost. But I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I don't know what you want, Richard, but I'm busy. So if you could just leave. He leaned against my desk, his face inches from mine. I just wanted to see for myself. To see how you're handling your downfall. And with that, he turned and left, his footsteps fading into the night. I sank back into my chair, my heart racing, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. For 3 months, I kept to myself, dodging any place where I might bump into him, burying myself in my work. But, as luck would have it, that fragile peace shattered one ordinary Tuesday when Richard burst into my office like a whirlwind of chaos. His hair was a mess, his suit crumpled, and his eyes, they had this wild, desperate look. I couldn't help it, I let out a laugh. What in the world happened to you, Richard? He slammed his hands on my desk, leaning in close. This isn't funny, Anna. You don't understand what's going on. I leaned back, raising an eyebrow. Oh, enlighten me then. What's so bad that Mr. Perfect has to come running to his ex-wife? He paced back and forth, like a caged animal. It's a disaster, Anna. When Dad died, he didn't just leave me the house. He left a mountain of debt, and now it's all on me. I crossed my arms, trying to keep the shock off my face. Richard in debt? That was something I never thought I'd see. He stopped pacing, looking at me with desperate eyes. We had to sell the house, Anna. The house is gone. And now, Mom's living with me, and she's driving me and her insane. The image of Mrs. Greaves and that young girl, Richard's new fling, at each other's throats was almost too good to be true. Let me get this straight. Your mom and your new girlfriend are at war, and you're what, asking for my sympathy? He groaned, running his hands through his hair. You don't get it. They're like animals, Anna. Fighting, throwing things, screaming so loud the neighbors called the cops last night. I couldn't hide the smirk. Sounds like you've got your hands full. But what does this have to do with me? He shifted uncomfortably, his face a mask of desperation. Anna, I need your help. Those debts, they were accumulated back when we were still married. It's not just my problem, it's ours. My laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a cold, hard stare. Ours? Really, Richard? Let's not forget the ironclad prenup we signed. Property, debts, the whole shebang, they stay on their respective sides of the fence. Your financial disasters are yours alone. After thinking for a minute, I added. Besides, you could have refused to inherit after learning about your father's debts. Why didn't you do that? He paced back and forth, his hands shaking. You don't understand, Anna. In a moment of sheer stupidity, right after Dad died, I sold part of the estate to buy some extravagant jewelry for her. I've tied myself to this sinking ship and there's no way out. I leaned back in my chair, my smirk returning. So, you squandered your inheritance on baubles and trinkets, and now you expect me to come to your rescue? This is a new low, even for you, Richard. He sank to his knees, his face a picture of misery. Anna, please. I'm not just thinking about myself. It's my mom too. She's caught in the middle of this mess, living in a war zone with that woman I brought home. Can't you at least consider taking her in? I stood up, feeling a surge of anger. Take in your mother? The same woman who treated me like dirt under her shoe for 15 years? You really think I'd welcome her into my home with open arms? His voice was barely a whisper now, filled with a mix of pleading and panic. I don't know what to do, Anna. I'm at the end of my rope. I leaned in closer, making sure my words hit hard. Listen carefully, Richard. Your financial ruin, your dysfunctional household, your mother, they are your burdens to bear. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. He looked up, a mixture of defiance and desperation in his eyes. So, you're just going to turn your back on me? On us? After all those years? I straightened up, my resolve as strong as ever. Yes, Richard, that's exactly what I'm going to do. You chose this path when you threw me out. Now, I suggest you get up and leave before I lose my patience. We're done here, Richard. This time, it's for real. As he stumbled out of the office, a part of me felt a twinge of something. It wasn't satisfaction, nor was it pity. It was a reaffirmation that I had made the right decision. The office had never been a place for drama, but that changed the day Richard and his new flame decided to air their dirty laundry for all to see. It was a typical morning until the shouting started. The words were muffled at first, but as I stepped into the foyer, the scene unfolded like a trashy daytime drama. There they were, in the middle of the lobby, Richard and that young thing he left me for, screaming at each other like a pair of street cats. The receptionist looked mortified, and a few of my coworkers were peeking out of their offices, eyes wide. What do you mean there's no money left? You promised me a life of luxury, not this nightmare, she shrieked, her face red with anger. Richard, looking more haggard than ever, was trying to calm her down, but it was like trying to smooth over a hurricane with a napkin. Calm down, will you? We can sort this out, just not here, not in front of everyone. But she was having none of it. Sort this out? Sort this out? I married a wealthy man, not some broke loser. You lied to me. I couldn't help but watch, the irony of the situation too rich to ignore. This was the life he chose, the life he traded ours for. As the argument escalated, one of the security guards approached, his face a mixture of concern and annoyance. Folks, please, this is not the place. If you need to have this discussion, take it outside. But Richard's new wife was on a roll, her voice rising with every word. Outside? Outside? I should be in a mansion, not arguing about money in a damn office building. The scene was drawing more spectators by the minute, and I noticed a couple of Richard's clients among them, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. This was bad, not just embarrassing. It was a full-blown spectacle. Richard, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to usher her out, but she shrugged him off, her eyes blazing. Don't you touch me. You've done enough. I sacrificed my best years for you, and for what? Empty promises and lies. The security guard stepped closer, his voice firm but calm. Ma'am, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises now. You're causing a disturbance. Richard, looking defeated and smaller than ever, gave me a fleeting glance before being led away, his young wife hurling insults over her shoulder as they went. The lobby slowly emptied, the whispers and murmurs fading as everyone returned to their desks. But the damage was done. The image of Richard, once a respected man in the office, now reduced to a figure of pity and ridicule, was etched in everyone's mind. And as for me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. He had made his bed, and now he was lying in it, tangled in the sheets of his own making. The office buzzed with whispers and side glances, a beehive stirred up by the latest scandal. Richard, once the cornerstone of the company, had been let go. His personal drama had spilled over into professional disaster. I overheard the chatter, piecing together the story from fragments of conversations as I passed by the crowded break room. Can you believe Richard got fired? After that fiasco with his wife in the lobby? Mark from accounting said, shaking his head in disbelief. Yeah, and that's not the half of it, added Lisa from HR, her voice low and tinged with a mix of pity and schadenfreude. He's back living with his mom now. Word is, he's up to his neck in debt, and that young wife of his is nowhere to be seen. Later that evening, as I walked to my car, lost in thought, a familiar voice stopped me in my tracks. Anna, Richard called out, his voice a mix of hope and desperation. I turned, finding him standing there, a shadow of his former self. His eyes held a plea I knew all too well. Richard, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Heard about your job. I'm sorry to hear that. He shuffled his feet, looking every bit the defeated man he was. It's been rough, Anna. I didn't see it coming. Not like this. I crossed my arms, my defense is up. Life has a way of surprising us. Especially when we take things for granted. He nodded, the weight of his choices etched into the lines of his face. I know I've made mistakes, Anna. Big ones. I'm at a loss. I don't know where to turn. I sighed, the reality of the situation settling in. And you think I can help you? After you turned your back on me? He looked down, his voice barely a whisper. I was wrong, Anna. About a lot of things. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need help. Any help. I shook my head, the absurdity of the situation not lost on me. Richard, you chose this path. You wanted a new life, and you got it. It's not my job to save you from your own choices. He swallowed hard, the finality in my voice hitting home. I know. I thought maybe, with our history. Our history, I cut in, is exactly why I can't help you. You made sure of that when you walked out that door. As I left him standing there, the evening air felt different, lighter somehow. Richard's fall from grace was a tale of his own making, a chapter in his life that I no longer shared. While Richard's world crumbled, mine was quietly piecing itself together, each fragment a step toward a new beginning. The news about Richard and his mounting troubles reached me one morning over a cup of coffee with my neighbor, Tom. He had a way of knowing the town's pulse, and that day, his news hit closer to home than usual. Rough times for Richard, huh? Tom said, leaning against my kitchen counter. Heard he's up to his neck in lawsuits now. Debts piling up, him and his mom facing eviction. Tough break. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness a stark contrast to the sweetness of my new life. Yeah, it's a mess. But that's a chapter 1, closed a while back. Tom nodded, understanding. And look at you now. Moving into your mom's old house, got that big promotion at work. It's like night and day compared to him. I smiled, a sense of gratitude washing over me. The house my mother left me was more than just property, it was a sanctuary, a place where new memories could be nurtured. And the promotion? It was a testament to my resilience, my ability to rise from the ashes of my past. Life's funny, isn't it? I said, glancing around the sunlit kitchen that was now solely mine. Just when you think you're at a dead end, a new path appears. Tom raised his coffee mug. To new paths and fresh starts. Our conversation drifted to other topics, but the contrast between my life and Richard's lingered in my mind. It was a stark reminder that every choice we make echoes into our future. I looked around my home, my refuge, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had thrown its worst at me, but here I was, standing stronger and more determined than ever. The past was behind me, and the future, with all its unknowns and possibilities, stretched out invitingly.